a doorway into Marcus Aurelius's world picture. This with me, and don't rush it. It's the winter of 171 CE. You and I are standing above the Danube, the river wide and dark, moving like cold metal beneath a pale sky. Below us, the Roman frontier is a stitched scar of forts, watchtowers, and muddy roads that vanish into forests. You can hear it even from up here. The ring of hammer on iron, the creak of wagons, Latin commands clipped by freezing air, horses snorting steam, and somewhere inside the largest command tent by lamplight, an emperor writes to himself in short, disciplined lines. Marcus Aurelius, not giving a speech, not posing for a statue, just trying to keep his mind steady while an empire shakes. That's the world I'm going to bring you into, not as a glossy legend, but as a lived landscape. Streets that stink of smoke and olive oil, ports where grain decides whether Rome eats, mountain passes where armies become slow and vulnerable and border, rivers where civilization ends in reeds and fog. You'll hear how war actually moves through supply, weather, roads, and the morale of tired men. You'll see the geography that shaped decisions, the Alps as a wall, the Euphrates as a lifeline, the Danube as both moat and doorway. One quick thing before we step through that doorway: if you haven't subscribed to the channel, subscribe now, and please like the video. These long documentary-style stories take real time to build, and if you want me to keep going and make more, I genuinely need your support. Now, Episode 1 begins. Episode 1. Rome at the start of Marcus Aurelius's reign, 165 CE. If you met me on my first morning in Rome, the sound would hit you before the sight. Rome doesn't wake gently. It grinds awake. Wooden carts groan on stone, mule bells jingle, vendors shout prices in quick, practiced rhythms, and underneath it all you hear the distant, constant movement of the Tiber. I entered through the Porta Capena, where the arches of the Aqua Claudia stride overhead like a frozen wave. That's the first lesson of Roman power. Water arrives by gravity alone, poured into the city as if the landscape itself has been disciplined. You'd expect the center of Rome to feel like a single place, but it's more like layers, each generation building on the bones of the last. Walk with me up the Via Sacra into the Forum Romanum. You can smell incense near temples, then step a few paces and smell sweaty wool, fried food, and horse droppings. The Basilica Aemilia sits heavy and elegant, a place of money and contracts. The Temple of Castor and Pollux rises like a promise that the gods are still listening. Senators in bright bordered togas cluster in knots, speaking softly and watching who greets whom. Because Marcus Aurelius has just become emperor 161 CE, and he shares the throne with Lucius Verus. That detail matters. Co-emperorship isn't just politics. It's a statement that the empire is big enough to require two faces. People talk about Marcus like he's made of restraint. You hear the word philosopher spoken the way you'd describe a rare tool, useful, unusual, not entirely trusted, and you hear Lucius described with a different tone, more appetite, more theater, more love of pleasure. The city doesn't know yet whether this partnership is a strength or a crack. If you want to understand Rome's real engine, don't stare at the marble. Follow the logistics. At dawn, I take you down toward the river docks, where the air smells of wet rope, pitch, fish scales, and sewage. Barges arrive from Ostia, Rome's port at the river's mouth, loaded with amphorae of olive oil from Hispania Baetica, wine from Gaul, garum fish sauce, marble blocks, timber, and above all, grain. Grain is not a background detail. Grain is the city's heartbeat. A disrupted convoy means unrest. Too many disruptions means riot. The state organizes an entire bureaucracy around feeding Rome: contracts, schedules, storage, guards, and a public distribution that keeps the poorest alive and keeps crowds from turning into a weapon. And the empire leaves physical evidence of that system. There's a hill not far from the river called Monte Testaccio, and it isn't a natural hill at all. It's a mountain made from broken amphorae, stacked for generations, the shards of trade turned into geography. When you see that, you understand the scale. Rome isn't big because it has grand buildings. Rome is big because it consumes the Mediterranean like a living thing and turns its leftovers into landmarks. Now let me show you another Rome, the one most people live inside. Step into an insula, an apartment block, tall and crowded. The stairwell is narrow, the plaster cracked, and the smells change as you climb. Lentils boiling, damp wool, smoke from charcoal braziers, sour wine, sweat. On the lower floors you find shopkeepers and artisans. Higher up, rooms shrink and rent drops. Fire is the constant fear. A single lamp knocked over can climb a building faster than men can run. That's why the vigils matter. The night watch and fire brigade, patrolling with buckets, hooks, and a grim authority. They are one more reminder that Rome is managed like a machine, and every machine needs maintenance. In the afternoon, if you want to study Roman social gravity, you go to the baths. The baths of Trajan, built over parts of Nero's old palace grounds, aren't just for washing. They're public living rooms built from heat and echo. You move through the tepidarium, then the caldarium where your lungs feel the steam, then plunge into the frigidarium until your skin stings. Senators, freedmen, soldiers on leave, you all share the same space, scraping oil from skin with strigils, talking in fragments. Politics happens in half sentences. Business is negotiated between columns. Gossip travels faster than any official messenger. And always behind the casual chatter is the quiet awareness of military power. Rome is far from the frontiers, but it is never far from the army. The Praetorian Guard, elite troops stationed near the city, are both shield and threat. They are the unspoken fact beneath the speeches. Emperors rule with legitimacy, yes, but also with the consent of men who carry swords. When Marcus and Lucius appear together in public, you can feel the effort behind the performance. Harmony is policy. The crowd cheers because crowds love certainty. But older men in the forum watch them the way sailors watch the sky, looking for the subtle shift that means a storm is coming. You ask me what Marcus feels like as a presence. He isn't loud. He's administrative. You feel him in court decisions and appointments more than in parades. People talk about legal reforms and the way petitions are handled, cases involving guardianship for orphans, property disputes, the rights of freedmen, the responsibility of officials. Rome is held together by law the way a ship is held together by nails. Most people never think about them until they fail. But while the city debates and bathes and eats, the horizon is already tightening. In taverns near the Subura, where the talk is rougher and the wine is watered without shame, rumors arrive from the east. Parthia is stirring again. Armenia, mountainous cold, strategically crucial, sits like a hinge between empires. Whoever controls Armenia controls routes through the highlands and access to the Euphrates frontier. Couriers talk about long roads and hard distances, from Rome to Brundisium, across the Adriatic to Dyrrhachium. then along the Via Egnatia, through Macedonia, toward Byzantium and Asia Minor. The empire is enormous, and you can feel that enormity whenever news arrives already half old. And here's the thing I want you to feel. If you were there beside me, Rome's confidence is real, but it's also fragile. It depends on ships arriving, officials behaving, armies holding lines far away, and luck, especially luck, because wars don't stay where they start. They travel along roads. They bring home loot, yes, but also refugees, bitterness, and diseases you don't have names for yet. So if you ask me, what would you do if you lived in Marcus Aurelius's Rome? I'd do what I did. I'd learn the city like you learn a living animal, its arteries, its habits, its weak points. I'd watch power from a safe distance, and I'd prepare, quietly, for the moment when Rome's marble certainty meets the hard geography of the frontier. Because that moment arrives faster than anyone wants. And in the next episode, you and I will follow the empire east, toward Antioch, the Euphrates, and the war that will change everything. Episode 2, East to the Euphrates, Parthian War and the Plague, 162-166 CE. When Lucius Verus goes east, the city pretends it's routine, just another campaign, another front. But you can feel the tension in the port crowds, in the way merchants hesitate before committing cargo, in the way families linger too long at farewells. We leave Rome the way officials and soldiers leave it, south along the great roads, through countryside dotted with tombs and villas, until we reach Brundisium. The harbor is a forest of masts. Salt is on everything. Sailors shout in Greek and Latin, and the sea, always the sea, waits like a second border. Crossing the Adriatic, you learn what empire really means in distance. Dyrrachium receives us with steep hills and a hard wind. From there, we take the Via Egnatia, one of Rome's great stone threads, pulling us through Macedonia. The road has milestones and way stations, but it also has reality. Mud after rain, bandits in the gaps, tired animals, and the constant need for water. We pass Thessalonica, then push east. Mountains tighten around the route. You start to understand why roads are strategic weapons. Without them, the empire dissolves into local worlds. By the time we reach Byzantium, still a strong city, not yet the future Constantinople, you can feel the pull of Asia. The Bosporus is narrow, the currents tricky, and the opposite shore is a different continent in a single glance. We cross into Asia Minor, and the landscape changes again. Rolling hills, dry plains, towns with Greek theaters and Roman law, shrines older than Rome itself. The empire here doesn't erase local identity. It sits on top of it, collecting taxes and offering roads in return. Our destination is Antioch, the great eastern metropolis near the Orontes River. If Rome is the empire's mouth, Antioch is one of its lungs. The streets are crowded, the markets loud, the air rich with spices and incense. Soldiers mix with merchants from farther east, men who speak languages you can't place. And here, you feel the war up close, because the war isn't just a clash of armies. It's a contest over corridors, the Euphrates crossings, the Armenian passes, the cities that anchor supply. The Parthian Empire isn't a simple enemy. It's sophisticated, wealthy, and built for mobility. Roman infantry is disciplined, heavy, stubborn. Parthian strength lies in cavalry, horse archers who can harass and vanish, armored cataphracts who hit like a moving wall. Geography shapes tactics. Open plains favor horses, narrow valleys favor foot soldiers. Rivers decide where you can move at all. The campaign pushes north into Armenia first. Mountains force order onto chaos. You can't just march. You climb, you freeze at night, you struggle to feed animals. Forts and depots become life. Roman commanders understand that a hungry army is a defeated army. When Armenia is brought back under Roman influence, attention shifts south and east toward Mesopotamia. We follow the Euphrates, wide, slow in places, dangerous in others, because rivers are both highways and boundaries. And then the war turns brutal in the way wars always do when they touch cities. The Romans advance on Parthian centers of power. Names that sounded distant in Rome become real places under sun and dust. Seleucia, Ctesiphon. Siegecraft is an ugly science, digging, undermining walls, building ramps, cutting supply, waiting out thirst and fear. Victory, when it comes, feels less like triumph and more like exhaustion. And yet back in Rome, triumph will be painted as destiny. On the ground, it is logistics and blood. Here is the part people rarely tell you plainly. The most lasting weapon of this war is not a spear or a sword. It's sickness. As troops move through crowded cities and camps, something begins to spread. Fever, rash, coughing, weakness that collapses strong men in days. No one calls it the Antonine Plague yet. No one knows it will follow the roads back west like a shadow attached to the army. We travel with the returning flow. Soldiers rotating home, officials reassigned, merchants chasing opportunity, and you can almost track the disease by rumor. In one town, they say a whole household is down. In the next, they say the dead are being burned faster than families can mourn. By the time the sickness reaches the western provinces, it is no longer a local problem. It's an imperial event. When we finally return toward Italy, you notice changes. Fewer faces in markets, more funeral processions, more anxious prayers at temples. In Rome, the city's density becomes a weakness. People live close, share water, share air and baths, share crowds and theaters. And the state, so confident in its management, meets something that ignores laws and ranks. Marcus Aurelius, back in Rome, is forced into a kind of leadership that philosophy alone can't soften. You can't argue a plague into obedience. You can only respond, organize, fund, appoint, reassure, and keep the state functioning when fear wants to break it apart. Taxes still have to be collected. Grain still has to arrive. Courts still have to operate. Soldiers still have to be paid. And then, as if disease weren't enough, news comes from the north. Pressure is building beyond the Danube. Tribes are moving, pushed by other tribes, by climate, by opportunity, by desperation. The frontier, already tense, starts to bend. So, if you were there with me at the end of this episode, you'd feel something chilling. The empire has won in the east, and yet it feels weaker. The victory parade doesn't cure the empty beds. The captured treasure doesn't refill the ranks quickly enough. The roads that made Rome powerful have also delivered Rome's new crisis. In the next episode, we go to the Danube front, where Marcus himself will spend years not in marble halls but in cold camps, trying to keep the northern world from pouring into the heart of the empire. Episode 3, The Danube Frontier, Forest Wars and the Rain Miracle, 166-193 CE. The first thing you notice when you reach the Danube frontier is how different the air feels. Rome smells like stone, dust, smoke, and cooking oil. The frontier smells like wet earth, pine, and animals. We travel north through Italy, then across the Alps. Those mountains are not a line on a map. They are a barrier that slows everything: wagons, reinforcements, messages, even confidence. On the far side, the provinces of Noricum and Pannonia stretch out, wide plains, rivers, and a nervous line of forts. The Danube itself is not just a river, it's a moving border, a supply route, and a psychological edge. On the Roman bank, you see roads, granaries, bathhouses inside forts, disciplined geometry. On the far bank, you see forest and uncertainty, villages that shift, alliances that change, leaders whose power is personal and fragile. The Romans call this boundary the limes, but don't imagine a continuous wall. It's a system, forts spaced by marching distance, watchtowers on high points, patrol boats, and roads built so troops can move quickly where trouble appears. We base ourselves near places that will one day be modern cities: Carnuntum, Vindobona, Aquincum. These are not glamorous, but they are critical. Carnuntum is a major hub with legions nearby, workshops, and a constant churn of supplies. Vindobona sits by the river in a landscape that can be green and beautiful in summer and merciless in winter. Aquincum, near today's Budapest, feels like a forward-facing machine. Stone buildings, drills, and the steady rhythm of military life. And then you see why Marcus is here. The pressure beyond the river is no longer a rumor. Germanic and Sarmatian groups, the Marcomanni, the Quadi, the Iazyges, are moving, raiding, testing the line. Some are enemies, some want treaties, some want land inside the empire. And behind them are other pressures, other migrations, a chain reaction of movement that Rome can't fully control. War here is not one clean battle. It's seasons of marching, skirmishing, ambushes, and negotiations that collapse overnight. Roman legions build camps every day, ditches, ramparts, palisades, because security is not assumed. They cut roads through forest. They bridge streams. They carry mills to grind grain. You learn the military economy of survival: bread, salt, vinegar, dried meat, and the endless need for fodder for animals. A cavalry unit without fodder is just men walking beside useless horses. Sometimes the enemy fights like a storm, appearing, striking, vanishing into trees. Sometimes they gather and stand. And when they stand, you see the Roman advantage: discipline, armor, coordinated movement. Shields lock, standards rise, horns signal, the legion moves like a single creature, but you also see the Roman vulnerability. Heavy infantry is powerful, but it is slow to adapt in broken terrain. Forests and swamps don't care about training. There is a moment, one of those moments history turns into legend, that people later call the miracle of the rain. Imagine this: a Roman force is trapped in intense heat, short on water, pressed by enemies. Men are collapsing, throats are raw, armor becomes torture. And then the sky breaks. Rain comes down hard, sudden, life-saving. Roman accounts celebrate it as divine favor. Later art will carve it into stone on the column of Marcus Aurelius in Rome. If you were there, you wouldn't need theology to understand the impact. Water decides whether an army lives. Weather can be as decisive as strategy. And Marcus, this is important, does not lead like a theatrical conqueror. He leads like a man who believes duty is heavier than pride. He moves with the army, winters in harsh camps, writes letters, receives petitions even in war zones. And yes, there are nights when, by lamplight, he writes private reflections, what we later call the Meditations. Think about the setting. Not a quiet library, but a frontier tent, with mud outside and the possibility of attack before dawn. Philosophy here is not a hobby. It's a tool to keep a mind from cracking under responsibility. You also see the human cost that grand histories compress into a sentence. Frontier towns fill with refugees, farms are burned, captives are taken on both sides. Roman commanders debate whether to punish brutally or negotiate. Every decision is a balance between deterrence and practicality. You can't hold a frontier with fear alone because fear creates endless enemies. But you also can't appear weak because weakness invites invasion. At times, the war pushes so hard that it threatens Italy itself. The memory of that fear spreads fast, the idea of barbarians crossing not just a river, but the symbolic boundary into the Roman heart. People in Rome will later look at monuments and imagine control. On the frontier, control is something you rebuild every morning. By the end of these years, you and I have learned something sobering. The empire is not collapsing, but it is strained. The plague has thinned populations. The wars are consuming money and men. And Marcus is being forced to spend his reign not in Rome's ceremonies, but in the geography of crisis. Rivers, forests, forts, and the long, cold roads between them. And then, just as the Northern War demands everything, trouble rises in the east again, not from Parthia this time, but from Rome's own side. A general will claim the throne. The map will pull Marcus across the empire once more. That's where we go in Episode 4. Episode 4, Revolt, Return, and the Last Campaigns, 175 and 180 CE. In 175 CE, news hits the empire like a hammer. Avidius Cassius, a powerful Roman commander in the east, is proclaimed emperor by his troops. Whether he believes Marcus is dead or believes the empire needs different leadership, the effect is the same. Civil war threatens. And civil war is the most dangerous kind of war because it turns Roman roads into arteries of Roman blood. Marcus responds in a way that tells you who he is. He doesn't explode into theatrics. He prepares. He gathers loyal forces. He brings his son Commodus, still young, because dynastic legitimacy matters and because Marcus is thinking in terms of continuity. He moves east, not just as a commander, but as a symbol the provinces can see with their own eyes. The legitimate emperor is alive, present, and coming. We travel again through the empire's middle spaces, across the Aegean world where cities are Greek in culture, but Roman in administration, through Asia Minor's plateaus and valleys towards Syria's heat and dust. And then, before the empire can tear itself open, the revolt collapses. Cassius is killed by his own men. The immediate threat ends, but the lesson remains. When an empire is strained, ambition becomes a spark waiting for tinder. Marcus does something revealing after this. Instead of drowning the East in punishment, he leans toward restraint. He knows that terror can stabilize for a moment and poison for a generation. He travels through cities, listens, reaffirms relationships. He visits Athens and honors its cultural weight because the Roman elite still sees Greece as a teacher of minds. The empire is not only held by legions, it is held by prestige, by the feeling that Rome's rule is part of an ordered world. He even goes to Egypt, Rome's grain heart, where the Nile's rhythm makes the Danube's winter seem like another planet. If you stand with me on the Nile's banks, you understand why Egypt is not just a province, but a strategic necessity. Its harvests feed Rome. Its administrative control is tight, and its geography, river, desert, narrow, cultivable strip, creates a different kind of order. By 176 CE, Marcus returns to Rome for a triumph that tries to compress years of war and plague into a single pageant. The city celebrates because it needs to believe celebration is still possible. Monuments speak the language of victory. Yet the deeper story is heavier. The empire has survived, but it has paid in lives, stability, and certainty. And then, almost immediately, the North calls again. In 177 CE, Commodus is made co-emperor. The symbolism is clear. The future is being installed while the present still bleeds. Marcus goes back to the Danube because the frontier has not become calm, simply because Rome held a parade. We return to Vindobona and the surrounding network of camps and roads. The landscape feels familiar now. The river's damp cold, the forests beyond, the muddy work of fortifying positions. Marcus is older. His body is worn by years of pressure, and yet he remains where the pressure is greatest, because that is what the role demands. If you were there beside me, you'd feel the sadness behind the discipline. A man who wanted to live by reason, forced to spend his reign proving that reason can survive chaos. The final campaigns are more of what frontier war always is, pushing back incursions, negotiating with some groups, fighting others, trying to create a buffer that will hold after the army moves away. Marcus's strategy is not just about defeating enemies, it's about shaping conditions so that the border can breathe. But borders don't breathe easily when populations move and scarcity drives raids. And then comes the quiet end, and the kind history often rushes past. In 180 CE, at Vindobona, near where modern Vienna will one day stand, Marcus Aurelius dies. The exact texture of his last days is not a clean cinematic moment. It's illness in a frontier environment, surrounded by officers, messengers, and the persistent needs of war. An emperor dies not in a vacuum, but inside the machinery of the state. If you were there, what would you feel? You'd feel the shift immediately. Marcus is not just a man, he is a stabilizing weight. When that weight is removed, the balance changes. Commodus remains. The future steps forward, and even if you don't yet know what Commodus will become, you can sense the uncertainty in the way veterans talk, in the way officials watch the new emperor's face, in the way the army wonders what kind of leadership is coming. So when you ask me what I saw and lived through in Marcus Aurelius's time, this is the honest answer. I saw an empire at its most impressive and most vulnerable at the same time. I saw how roads and grain ships and legal rulings are as important as battles. I saw how geography, rivers, mountains, forests, acts like an invisible commander, shaping what humans can and cannot do. And I saw an emperor who tried relentlessly to live with self-control while the world demanded constant force. And if you take only one feeling from this story, let it be this: the golden age was never gold all the way through. It was held together day after day by people solving problems faster than disasters could multiply. That is what it looked like to live inside it. Outro. One last thing. If you enjoyed this journey into Marcus Aurelius' world and you want more documentary-style historical stories like this, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It's the clearest way to tell me you want a continuation, and it's what makes it possible for me to keep creating these long episodes for you.